Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation and ascension guide, creator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift live stream / podcast. And we're talking about today, living in a conscious state is compassion. I'm going to use air quotes with that, compassion, all it's cracked up to be. And it's a really important topic. And I know I've touched on it in other, podcasts and many other discussions I've done, but it's a really, it deserves its own freestanding thing because I've had this conversation several times in the pretty recent days. And it seems to be a common thing that has so many layers of maybe, it's like the common layers of misunderstanding, or that we've just sort of layered into the term compassion, because we use that a lot, right? We equate compassion with a good person. We equate compassion with somebody doing good deeds, caring about other people, and so we've gotten this egoic connection to it. We've gotten an egoic connection to it in a way of saying, well, if people see me as compassionate, and this is a very subtle thing, if people see me as compassionate, well, then they'll see me as a good person. Or I strive to be a compassionate individual so that I am a good person, right? So think about that. If you go and look up the word compassion in the I think it's the Webster's Dictionary, the definition is having pity for somebody's misgivings. So it's really interesting because I have found that this comes up a lot, especially amongst those in the spiritual community. I found that it's really interesting to even put the pity, because pity is an ego term, because pity means I have a better situation than you. I feel badly for you because I'm better than you, or I'm having a better experience than you, or whatever. And there's no judgment in that, but this is something to just really, observe. So I've had, in my experience and in actually many others that I know, they've said to me, well, it's funny because so-and-so has told me I'm not compassionate, or, I get that as a sort of this retort. I'm supposed to be so spiritual. How come I'm not compassionate? But really in that context, what people are saying is, it's usually because they don't react in the standard human way to a situation, which is interesting because as we become more and more conscious and see things more and more from the larger picture, we then start to not see them in terms of good or bad, right? So we can only pity something if we believe it's bad. And also it still has a duality nature to it when we pity something, because we're saying that something is better than another, right? So one of the examples I use all the time in terms of reframing our minds around the term compassion and the understanding of compassion is that, it's really funny in the first world, in the industrialized world, we talk about like third world countries and how terrible it is for them, living situations, and they don't have anything, or they have very little. And we should have compassion for them and do all this stuff. And we need to go in there and we need to show them what it's like to live a materialistic life and everything else, which is really interesting because I understand and I've seen that they've done these sociological studies that have shown that actually those in some of those countries where there's very little in terms of materialistic wealth, there's very little in terms of like physical belongings, that actually, sociologically, many of the population is actually happier than those who've graded themselves in an industrialized civilization, because we tie so much into our value based on what we have, right? How nice of a house do you have? How convenient is it for you? How much fast food can you eat? How many clothes can you buy? And we think that actually increases the value of our life, and we've become so really buried in those beliefs that we've forgotten how to really connect with each other, and realizing that really connection from the heart is what brings most value to many of us once we actually allow ourselves to do it. because then we can see the sameness of the divinity and the, at the same time, the divinity and the wholeness and the individuality within each of us when we connect from the heart. And then we stop looking at things for better or for worse. We stop thinking of things as, you know, this is a bad thing or a good thing, or I have a better life or a worse life or whatever, because we start just seeing it as how it is. And then it's just as beautiful in the way it is. And as every individual is beautiful and divine and amazing and infinite in the way they are. So let's talk about compassion and individual experiences, right? Because then we get into that whole idea of like having a pity for somebody else's, like, you know, what we believe are misgivings. When we start living in a much more conscious manner, we start looking at it from the perspective of, we are here to fulfill an individual journey, right? Like, so as the divine, we've individualized ourselves, embodied ourselves to complete a certain set of lessons in duality and separation. And we've set ourselves up with the body, with the surroundings, with the experiences, with the family and the people around us. We have set all that up, this is my understanding. And so it's perfect in the way it's laid out because it's set up to help us learn or even evolve to transcend certain things so that we do finish the lessons and move on, right, that we've chosen to have. So when we look at it from that perspective, we get into this pattern of this habit of saying, okay, well, it's perfect. Everybody's journey is perfect as it is. And when we continue on our quest of remembering our consciousness, remembering our wholeness, remembering our, you know, our perspective in that wholeness, and we realize every piece and part is essential to the whole puzzle we've created in separation, there is no pity because there is just gratitude for what everybody's going through. Like, and we can just sit in a space of love so that my goal, my understanding is that it's just the motivation is to be like, okay, well, my focus has been to be able to get back to a place of living from love in all spaces, in all parts of the experience. And the more I do that, the more I become the lighthouse so that other people can see that you can do that. And then it's living by example, right? So all I can do is hold this space, and people always talk about holding space. What's holding space? Well, it's really holding this space of saying, okay, well, I'm allowing this for myself. And as you're just a different embodiment of the same divine consciousness, absolutely. Why would I not hold that space for you too? To complete your lessons, to transcend what is holding you back or you're allowing yourself to limit yourself with, so that you can come to that realization and live in that space of love and acceptance. So the more of us that do that, the more we clear out the energy, and the more we clear out the vibration and bring it to a higher, much higher level to help the evolution of this entire, not just this planet, but the entire, duality-based existence, because we're all evolving the entire experience, is my understanding. So when you get into that space and you recognize that, okay, the most I can do, so if I step in and say, well, my experience is better than yours because you haven't gotten here yet, that's also ego, right? Because anytime we say better, that's ego, it's duality based, and better or for worse, good and bad, all that kind of stuff. So when we are aware and conscious of that whole, and we really truly exist in that place where we can adopt that perspective of everybody's journey is perfect, and all I can do is hold that space of love and focus on getting to a place where I hold that really high vibrational space of love in my own just being and existence, and and helps others to motivate themselves in a way that says, I can do this too. Wait a second, I can do this too. Because what happens is when I start saying things like, yeah, I'm in a better place than that person, right? Then I start thinking that my journey is better than theirs. And then I think, well, I know better, so I'm going to intervene and I'm going to take care of this for this other person, right? Well, that's ego, because underneath all that is I'm going to prove how good I am or how valuable I am or whatever by doing this. However, what we've forgotten is if we've chose a journey to complete a certain set of lessons, if somebody else does that for you, you're not learning the lesson, right? Often it's just sort of delaying you having to learn it. So it just happens to come up again in a different way or the same way or more intense or whatever. So we can root each other on. And like, basically it goes back to that whole dependence on inner guidance. And I basically ask anytime that I feel this compulsion to help somebody or do something or whatever is, so, is it for me to do this? Is there anything for me to do here? And the answer is, if the answer is no, then I just sit back and hold that space of love. A lot of times it is just hold this space of love. And so that's a completely different way of existing, because many would perceive that as not compassionate with the air quotes again, because, you're so fortunate, and how could you not do this for this person and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, but if you look at how many are stuck in the same cycle, and they have people that help them with stuff all the time, and then they don't get themselves out of the rut. And yes, you can have help. And I have been guided to help others as well. So I just listen to my own guidance. Sometimes they just need you there for 5 minutes. Sometimes they need you there for 5 years. Sometimes they just need you there, like in the background, right? Just to help them with that motivation of, I can do this, right? And it might seem like, the ego then just so complains and gets so angry, so angry, because it's like, why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you doing this for me? Why, da-da-da? And it's like, well, because this thing is to do, it's that whole, like, teach a person to fish, give a person a fish, they can eat for one day, but teach them how to fish and they can, eat for a lifetime. It's not teaching somebody, it's allowing them to remember the power within themselves. So the way and the style of how I hold on, Sadat says, so true. It's all about focusing on doing love, be love, as described in 1 Corinthians. Allowing it to flow changes the vibes, reduces stresses for everyone. Offering to assist them and see what they request is so powerful. Yeah, well, the whole thing is getting to this, like, really being in this place of listening to guidance. And if guidance, not ego, and that's the thing to ask is, okay, well, when you say, so is there anything for me to do here? And the guidance is yes. And then you say, well, what is it? Sometimes it's not what people think, right? I remember one time, and I've had this multiple times, I had somebody come to me and they said, okay, so there's this person I know, and, they have been in and out of like sleeping on people's couches for a while, and they keep on getting into one really bad relationship after another, and da-da-da. Like, I don't even remember what the whole story was. They said, but I've known this person for a long time, and they've asked to come and stay with me, and my guidance is just saying no. So what's the matter here? And I said, well, so then listen to your guidance. And they're like, but, right? Because what we are taught is, oh, I'm supposed to lend a hand. I'm supposed to put my hand out. I'm supposed to, be compassionate by doing that. But yet the guidance was saying no. And I said, well, what's the no coming from? Like, is there fear or anger or anything like that? And she's like, no, it just is like, no. And I said, well, then listen to it. And by her saying no, caused that person to look another direction and start to look in different places, because they sort of had burned all their bridges and staying with different people and whatever. And then they finally sort of got on their own 2 feet, which then is the lesson, right? And sometimes the ego really mourns that by not, like, the mourns like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not helping them and they're going to crash and burn. And it's like, well, or they're going to actually stand on their own 2 feet and resolve that, right? So the key is, and it's not like always, it's actually very rarely one or the other. It's very rarely like all in or all out. It's usually, it's just that if you listen to guidance, it's typically a different set of guiding interchanges then the ego might try to interject by saying, oh, well, I'll help this person, right? And people say, well, that's not from the ego, but it is, because there's, especially when underneath it is this motivation of, oh, I'm such a good person. it's funny because they're like people I've heard, they're like, oh, I did my, like, and they're really happy to report their good deed. Like, oh, I did this really good deed about this person, and that made me feel so good. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's great. But why does it make you feel good instead of just being in a place of love all the time and just sharing that love? It just shows it shows its way in so many, it shows itself in so many different ways. Again, it's like I said, a much different way of existing, because we're not tying what we do, or even just think about something as simple as sending a gift to somebody, right? And, courtesy and culture will dictate, like, okay, you're supposed to say thank you this way, or you're supposed to send a thank you note, or you're supposed to call them and thank them profusely, or, whatever. There's just so many different ways. And if you ask 5 different people, they would tell you how they would respond to a gift in 5 different ways. Okay. And what kind of gift and who's it from and all that kind of stuff. So anything that we get, when we start to show gratitude, right, we can say thank you. Some people are not in that place. Some people aren't ready to receive in that place because of themselves and where they are in terms of their own self-love. So sometimes they'll receive, and then they have all these egoic kind of things attached to it. And they might not say thank you, or they might not respond in the way that somebody expects. But then listen to the word expect, because anytime we have expectation, it comes down to ego and what the ego wants to have as a return, right? Because it's a tit for tat thing instead of I'm just sharing love, right? So, so these are all these little nuances of how we have all of this expectation incorporated. So if we give something, it's to give from the heart and from the space of love and free of expectation and obligation to say, because here's the thing, when we do come from that space and we simply ask for guidance to say, okay, is this for me to do, right? And you get yes, and it's like, okay, so I'll do it. Then there's no, like, I'm waiting for somebody to pay me back or to come back to me and say thank you profusely, or to, like, and I did, like, we all have that. We all have it, because I've heard, like, well, I did this, and I did this, and this for this person. And yeah, they said thank you, but, like, when it came time where I needed help with something, they weren't there. And it's like, so what? You expected the return at some point? So you gave with expectation of returning. And that's okay, except realize that that's just ego, right? Of saying, but then what's your motivation? That you gave with expectation of return, right? When we come to this place of existing in a space where we know that we are creators of our own reality, and we trust, as the divine consciousness embodied as who we are, that we create the whole thing, that we can create and manifest anything we so choose, and we take full self-responsibility for that, then we don't need to expect, because we already know what's created. And we don't need to say, okay, it needs to come to me through this person, through this kind of meeting, through this kind of, experience. But we just say it can come in any way. So when we freely give to others, guess what happens? Naturally, they learn and remember, not learn, but they start to remember how to give freely themselves. And that's where that whole, like, idea of pay it forward came from. And I think that's a beautiful idea. And if you've never watched the original movie with, I think it was Macaulay Culkin. No, it wasn't. It was the guy. It was the kid from, can't remember the actor's name. It was the Sixth Sense. It was the kid from that. But anyway, beautiful story about like deciding to affect others by simply doing something for somebody else. Right. And I'm not saying to make that like it's not the priority, but the thing is to say, I'm doing something just to do it because I'm guided to do it and help you right now, and not expect something in return. And if somebody has all the gratitude and says, what can I do for you? And because we're so used to saying it has to be done something in return, we can say, so yeah, just, you know what, share this love forward. That's what pay it forward is. Share this love as well. Like, remember how to be love and just share yourself openly in that space of love in the way that you're guided, right? So That's a very different way of acting, and a different sense of motivation than what we call compassion, because most often compassion has to do with what we believe we're supposed to do, what makes us a good person. Even like belief systems and everything else, I tell you, well, you have to do this to be a good person. And it's like, well, no, we're already divine and perfect and amazing, and we are already good and bad and everything in the middle, because it's all a part of us, right? When we start to act from a space of love and from inner guidance, we actually share far more of ourselves than when we are totally motivated through ego and expectation of obligatory return and response. Like it's funny, because there's one person I know who, I heard multiple times when they sent some gift to somebody and they never responded, or they sent something and they never got a thank you or whatever. And I can understand, okay, well, that's not following common courtesy, but you don't know where that person is right now. And you don't know like where the ego is in that individual. And did you just send the gift to get the thank you? Or did you send the gift from your heart to say, I'm just sharing my love with you, and I'm sharing this part of me with you, and I'm just overflowing with it, so I'm sharing this with you right now. To me, that's the important part, because then we're not having that egotistical expectation of return. And it's funny, like I said, because many people will say, oh, well, then, nobody's going to share, nobody's going to care for each other. I'm like, no, actually, it's quite the opposite. When we do actually live in a space of self-love, unconditional self-love, not egoic self-love, meaning that I'm better than you, but I am awesome and so are you. That's a completely different energy. When we start to live and really go through our experience in that space, then there's just so much of us to share, because we're just overflowing with that love for ourselves, and therefore we want to share it with others. And then it's so much, everything is given so much more freely. So it's like when somebody knows that you are motivated that way, or you're simply in that existence, right? And you share through that kind of love, and not what the ego terms compassion and expectation, then we can, then actually I think the gratitude is even more, because it comes through with a much different energy. Like sometimes, well, often gifts are given with this feeling of strength, right? Of strength, of a tether, right? Of like some kind of like an obligation. And almost sometimes somebody giving something to somebody else can feel heavy, because then the person receiving is like, oh, now I feel like I'm obliged to do this to the, to do this back or whatever. And it's like, no, giving is to be free. And when we give to be free, then others remember how to give to be free as well. And then it feels very freeing and liberating for them. So Dot says, giving anonymously helps protect ego and gives you stay detached, and keeps you staying detached from the outcome. It also helps encourage faith and manifestation, things we need and want. Yeah, well, I mean, giving anonymously, and then just moving on, right? That's a great way. Yeah, it is a great way. And then at some point you just get to the point where it doesn't matter, like whether it's anonymous or not, you can just give, like, here, take this, or let me help you with this, or yeah, I'm committed to this. And there are things that I was guided to do, like I said, guidance was, yeah, this would be helpful, and this is really important for whatever reason, even if I didn't see it at the time, in helping somebody with something or whatever. And then there are other times where you would think from the ego that we should do something. Should, again, another word from the ego. And so we do, and that's that obligatory kind of thing that makes me prove that I'm a good person. That's a very different energy, right? That feels so much different. And, the other thing that I want to talk about briefly, and in terms of when we say things about having compassion, is that we forget that it's interesting. We have gone into this very, very ingrained habit of being in that space of misery loves company, right? And somehow we have, in general, like the majority of the human experience is comparing woes, right? Comparing, like, oh, have you ever been in a group of people and somebody comes in and says, oh, well, I have this going on, I don't know, I have this toothache, or I have this whatever, or I have this other ache, or I have arthritis or whatever. And then all of a sudden everybody, like anybody in the group who has the same thing is like, oh, I understand what you're saying. And then it becomes about them, like, oh yeah, I've had that kind of pain, and da, 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 and this is how I deal with it. And then it's like this connection, like we bond in that kind of way. So we have this fear in the ego, as if we don't bond that way, if we don't like compare, like have that idea of compassion in terms of, oh, well, that person, so sad, so sorry. Like, look at what happened in the news. Look what happened to this person or these people or whatever. And then people want to talk about it in that negative sense of like how horrible it is, right? And when you don't attach to that, then that can be considered as not being compassionate, right? And it's funny because I've seen it, and I've had it happen with me, where people are like, well, don't you care? And it's like, I do. I care actually really in a huge manner, like more than I have ever cared before. And I really care about everybody completing their lessons and moving forward on their journeys. And thank you for taking that on and me not having to take it on. And when we start to change our verbiage and say, I don't need to connect to somebody through lack and negativity and complaining, right? Or complaining to get pity from somebody or compassion, right? And I'm not saying to never talk about something. I say things as they are, but I also don't say it with any motivation to get that kind of response. And I also don't dramatize, right? So I had said this to somebody once who is in my close purview, who would say, oh, you're just not a compassionate person, which is so funny because I'm like one of the most caring, connected, like to the whole kind of, I have that kind of existence. And I'm like, no, you're just not a compassionate person. And I finally said, after about the fourth time the person said it to me in this particular situation, I said, so you are confusing compassion with dramatic. And no, I'm not dramatic, because every time something happens, I ask guidance. Is this the case? Is there anything to do here? And if guidance is no, just hold a space of love, then that's all I do. Well, I don't go, oh my God, this is horrible. This is terrible for you. I'm so sorry. Oh, what can I do? And da, da, da. It's, oh, I understand. I understand totally what you're going through, right? Or I don't. Well, even if I don't, it's like, well, I'm holding this space for you. And I just, anything, like, I honor your journey. And I thank you for being the part of the divine to embody that. And I'm here to support you in love and whatever I'm guided to do. And I honor that you're there to complete, this obstacle. Like, and I'm often guided to just suggest to them, well, maybe you want to do this, right? And like guidance would say, be careful with that though, because a lot of times when the ego tries to like sort of sneak in and go, well, you should do this, or you should do that, or you shouldn't do this. Instead, it's, you might want to look at this. Well, no, that's just because it's what I do for a living, right? Or the guidance would be like, well, you could suggest this. And if they shoot me down, that's great. That's fine. That's their choice or whatever. And like I said, I focus on seeing things in the bigger picture, but that's also, they know their journey better than I do, right? Even somebody I'm in a session with, I can tell them what I see and they can take it or leave it. They can go on and do whatever they want. And even if it's completely the opposite of what we had discussed in our session, I accept it as perfect. Like, I don't sit there and judge that it's not perfect. I don't sit there and judge, oh, well, I told them to do this and they didn't. And I hear a lot of us that do this kind of work. I've heard that in conversation too. It's like, oh, well, I told them to do this, that they should do this and they didn't. And I'm like, well, you realize should is just the ego. Sometimes so what happens is we get a message, or we see things from this bigger perspective. And then we filter it through our personal experience of saying, well, you should do this or you shouldn't do this, because that's what I would do, right? That's really the implication. And so what I teach when I teach energy progression and any other kind of this kind of work, I teach that it's not for us to filter, right? So if we're going to help somebody get messages from their higher self and higher consciousness that they're not yet getting for themselves, the key is for us to not translate, because it's not for us to tell them what to do or not to do. It's just to make sure they get the message in the most accurate way possible that they're not already hearing. And sometimes when you do that, they actually, oh yeah, well, I sort of got that, but I just, it was uncomfortable, and that can be a challenge in the beginning because the ego wants to jump in and so I'm sorry, I was just looking, I have like two monitors going here and I can see there's a comment. Stephanie says, often another conveys that they are more aloof than compassionate. I think being aloof can be another form of drama. And Dot says, you're an empowerer and encourager, not a savior. That's so much more compassionate than rushing to the situation with a solution. Right, Dot. That is exactly how I work. Is like, yeah, my job is to help to empower you to do this and optimize your experience yourself, right? So, it's interesting. The thing about aloof, that can be a judgment too. So what is aloof? Aloof is detached, but that's not, it's not a form of drama. Being aloof can be, I'm stepping away or I'm stepping back because guidance is to not get involved with this, to not be a part of it, not get pulled into it. Sometimes, we have a lot of addiction to drama in this reality right now. And so addiction to drama is, somebody like who is constantly in chaos or has the same chaotic situation that comes up again and again and again. And, you might have been called to give them some interjection or talk about something or give them some ideas or do something. You might have been guided to do that in the past. And they might have overlooked it. They might have taken it or left it and then ended up like not getting past that spot and coming back to the same thing over and over again. Well, then at some point you just get to that place of saying, okay, well, I can just be there in a space of love and love the person and not have to interject and not have to be a part of the drama and trust that they will get to the place in their journey where they're done with the drama and they can just move beyond it. So that can be seen as aloof. That can be a judgment. Oh, you're so aloof, you're so detached. And it's like, well, part of even the Buddhist, belief is being in this world and not of it, right? So that's benevolent, what they call benevolent detachment, of saying, I can understand your situation and not have to feed it, right? But I can love you and I can hold that space, and it might not be what somebody expects. And therefore then they would judge it as aloof or detached or not compassionate or whatever. So that's what I'm saying. There's all this stuff that we have these interlaced little things. And going back to what, Dot is talking about, being the empowerer and the encourager and not the savior, that is the biggest takeaway from this right now, is it's time to stop being motivated to be the savior or martyr. Like, they're both sort of interchangeable in my book. Because, that whole idea of looking to somebody else to be the savior is an egoic one. And because it's also a belief, it's a belief of lack. Now I have to look to somebody else to save the day. And to position yourself as a savior. That is also ego, because it's saying, well, I have better answers than you. So we save ourselves. We find our own solutions. And, it's interesting. A lot of what I have been guided in the beginning of what I do and everything else, it's really interesting because I don't dramatize a lot of what I've been through in my life. And I've been through a lot of things. We've all been through a lot of things. Many of us who are here now have had just really piled it up in these lifetimes so that we can just complete a whole bunch of stuff, right? So we can just move on from it. It's not a part of my identity. It's not something I hold on to. And so when it's funny, because we have that habit of connection of, oh, you have had to understand me, you have to have gone through what I did, right? And people will say, well, how do you know? Because you don't have this, or how do you know? It's like, well, but that doesn't mean I've never had it in this life or other lives. It's not that I don't understand the energy of it, but I also understand, like, so here's my question is how do we help you do you? How do we help you stand in your own beingness in unconditional love and power? And that to me is the key to being love. And to me, being love is a far more encompassing motivation than being compassionate. It's a much different energy. It's a much different way of existing. So you know, it's the idea of yeah, and it's saying, I am in such a place of self-love that I am overflowing and I'm here with you, right? So some might not call that comforting, right? Because I'm not sitting there going, oh, poor you, you know, feel so sorry for you and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, and that's where we say, oh, that's not compassionate, or that's, you know, detached or whatever. It's saying, you know, it's like, you know, I love myself. I love this space, and I love being here with you. And I understand you're having a time. I'm just here, and I can, I'm here because I'm guided, or to be here to do something with you, or to do something for you, or I'm not guided to do it, and just hold that space of love. Those are both the same thing. There's no difference. And when we do it completely from guidance and not from judgment of like, you know, should I or shouldn't I, you know, that's all motivated by ego. Because is this right or wrong, or is this the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it? So this is a really big thing that's integrated into our realities. And we've really sort of gone over the 30-minute mark here. So for your home play this week, really the key is to really look at your actions and your motivations and what you do in helping other people or helping yourself. And the key is to always nourish and help yourself first and foremost. So you get that place of unconditional love as the gratitude for being the divine embodied as you are right now. And when you live that, then you are just effusive in sharing that love with others. And then you can look at your motivation of, am I to do this, you know, as part of this, am I to do this? And as part of being love, right? As Dot had said earlier, as well as it's not about, yeah, I've talked about, it's changing our way of existing, right? Because in many forms right now, many are motivated to do something to be it, right? So we're motivated to do certain things to be good, to do certain things to be love, to do things in certain ways, or a collection of a whole bunch of different ways, to be something else, to be seen some way, or to be valued, which is all externalizations, right? So the key is shifting that entire energy internally to, how do I be love? And to be love, I have to love myself first to really be love, without expectation, obligation, and all that kind of stuff. To be able to see things, it's, I am remembering how to be love, to be the divine, to exist in this wholeness of creation and love. And then we do from the being, and we don't do to be, but we do from being, which is, it's very subtle, again, very powerful. So look at that within yourself. Look at how you are within your realities. Look at how you are in a place of being versus doing, like how to change from a place of doing to be, to just being and doing from being, and start to focus there, because that is the most help we can give to anybody, is to help ourselves to be that love. Because once we are, then we spread. It's like a contagion, and everybody gets there. Dot says, this was so powerful and right on time. Big confirmation and permission to be consciously embracing what is and allow things to flow and not control things as they seem to need to go for a desired outcome. Thank you, Dot. Yeah. It is, and it's very important, is my understanding. So everybody just be conscious of that this week, and we'll see where that takes us into next week for next week's Living the Shift. So thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one.